Hi folks, this is Praveen Kumar Katwe from Informatica Global Customer Support. In this video, we will walk through the Model Repository Service startup issues. The agenda for this video is as shown on the screen. We will first go through the MRS overview to brush up the audience who are not yet so much familiar with the MRS details, and we will see where do we find the logs for the MRS, and we go through all kind of logging that MRS does, and we will also get information about the common startup issues which we see for our customers oftenly. Okay, and also we will walk through a set of easy and sensible tips which would help to go about any kind of startup issues for the services here. And at the end we have references to some KB articles. Yeah, so MRS stands for which is actually called commonly, this is the name we refer to, the Model Repository Service. So Model Repository Service is actually a repository service which allows you to access the models that have been created and use them. Now these models could be anything. These models could be the tables, these models could be the mapping, transformation. Every component which you would see would be converted into models, and the operation on those models is performed. So it is just some modeling framework which Informatica has a proprietary, and uh, using that modeling framework we create objects. Now these models are what your mappings and your transformations, everything which you create on the inside the MRS gets saved as. So MRS is just a service which allows you to persist those objects which you have created, and those persistence is done using Hibernate into the a model repository database. Now the model repository database can be anyone which you would have chosen as the database underlying, right? So it could be Oracle, it could be SQL Server, it could be DB2. So the user specifies a JDBC URL, and using that JDBC URL the model repository service connects to the database and provides an interface for all the other client to do operations which are respect to those models. Okay, so model repository service is just a service which manages the model repository where all the models are persisted. The model repository stores the metadata created by Informatica products in a relational database to enable collaboration among the products. You create a model in developer tool, you can access it in DIS for running. You can also access certain models from the analyst tool as well. Okay, so based on the use case the models get exposed, and it is the Java service process. Yeah, the most important point as an Informatica administrator we should be knowing it is a Java process, and it is the direct child of the node process. Okay, so whenever you have a setup, a process is running, you can figure out whether this is a model repository service or not. There is an easy way to do that, which I'll just show in a minute. And the reason we'll go through this is we have to understand when we are discussing about startup issues, we should know that is my process really running or not. So to figure out that, we are going to do that exercise, and then the MRS connects using JDBC driver, okay, which I've already mentioned, and that JDBC driver is Informatica provided, and it is always the data direct drivers. And it also has a child process given you would have enabled the cache process for it. So cache process is something which the MRS can use to reduce the database interaction it does by storing certain requested objects. For the further request, it can actually use the cache so that the request gets serviced directly from the cache instead of again hitting the database for the output. So let me show you how you can figure out whether your MRS process is running or not. So first of all, there are multiple ways to do that. One is go to the logs from the admin console, and there you can add a PID column in the logs view of the administrator console. There also you can find out the PID, as well as you can also go to the this shell where you can find out all the processes which are running under this user which I'm using here, and it gives a lot of list of users here, and we could actually do a grep on MRS provided we have MRS in the name of the service, right? So here we have MRS. So basically the command which I used was PID, PPID, UID and CMD. So PID was this 7117 and PPID was this. Now you would see this PPID 72175, right? So let's have a look whether node is direct parent. So it should be a direct parent of the node. So 72175. So you can see here this is our node process which is actually shown up here. Okay, and the other easy way to figure out is you can just search for the MRS JSF log. You'll find out in the second slide which I'm showing the log name. That log is specific to your specific MRS process only, so you can also filter the name of the log which is passed as an argument to this okay. So based on that you can figure out. And another thing which we can see is it has a child process, right? So let's do something. Let's see the child process of 7717. So I will make this PPID and change this to the PID of the MRS process 7717117. So you can see this is another Java process which is actually a cache, out of process cache. Okay, so this is a cache process which I was talking about, which the MRS can use to optimize the returns from the model repository service. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation and check where we are now. Okay, so the next part of the information would be finding the logs. So this is very important slide because whether this presentation video is going to help you or not, but these are the logs you should definitely need to see in order to confirm that given a KB article or given a engineer suggestion or given your past experience, you can figure out whether this particular error or message which you see is relevant to the issue you know. So these are all places where you can find the MRS related logs. So the MRS logs can be found in the service logs on the file system actually. So that is stored in nothing but in the location where it is infra home /log/ the node name service model repository service, and then there will be MRS underscore your MRS name. See that there is MRS underscore irrespective of whatever you have name as. So if your MRS name is MRS underscore 1, then it will be MRS underscore capital MRS underscore 1, okay, dot log. That is the name of the file, but eventually it would also have 0 1 2 3 before the dot log. So just for the example I have given you there a log for demo MRS service. Okay, and you can see the zero file, the file with the zero name is the latest file, and the logs will be rotating. There would not be more than 10 logs at any point of time, and it will rotate. And the next part we should be knowing is the service log from administrator console. This is the same logs which you are actually getting from the file system, but there's only one difference, is the stacks in this service logs are truncated, but the visibility of the messages is more clear in administrator console, and it's also convenient to access the logs from admin console. But if you are looking for a detailed ones, then definitely service logs from the file system is one which Informatica GCS would be more interested into. Okay, so you can actually get it from using the export logs wizard, which is present in the administrator console. Same happens is the domain logs. Now, because we are dealing with startup issues, and the node is the parent of the MRS, which we just saw in this previous experiment. So we all need to know is if there is a issue in even triggering of the Java, like say the Java was not found for the MRS process to be started up, like you would not see any kind of MRS log return or any kind of these other logs would be written. The only place you can get the details of such errors would be your domain log. Okay, even if you miss some JVM argument, you played around with the JVM arguments and something is wrong, or for some reason the JVM could not trigger the Java process itself, you would always find it gets logged into the domain log with the entire command line option, which you should be able to debug from there. Then the JSF communication logs is another one. So this is the log, not necessary for startup issues, but it is actually Java services framework, which Informatica is proprietary, and we have a way of communication between the MRS and its client using beep protocol, and any kind of messages which is requiring some notice or observation which the logs are making will be actually stored in this. Like say for example, there is a communication issue and the developer client disconnected its connection immediately, so you would see certain messages about it around here. Okay, so there are different kind of JSF errors. So greeting exchange fail and different kind of errors will be there, so those errors are logged. For startup issues, they are not of much significance, especially for MRS, because MRS would only communicate with the node, which is actually the server here. So this log is for where MRS is actually working as a server. Okay, so and MRS itself is actually a beep protocol based server. Okay, and anyways, you will find this log here. It will be very useful when debugging different other issues. When you are having issue while connecting with the developer tool or DIS, you are having some connection losing scenarios with MRS, you would definitely find some messages over here, along with increasing the logging severity of the service logs to debug mode. Okay, now we'll walk through certain common startup issues which the GCS has come across, and it would help you to quickly vamp. You might actually hit these issues in a typical scenarios, and we are just going to tell you certain KBs and certain related solutions which can be used to come over them. Okay, so the model repository database misconfiguration. So this is one very common issue, something wrong with respect to the database information, and that is what categorized here as MRS database configuration misconfiguration issues. Then there is file system issues, disk space, and relevant to those issues, and there are other issues like port issues. Because it is a server, it has to start listening to a port, and getting that port is something which is needed. Along with that, we also have certain network related issues. So port issues and network issues are actually the same thing here, which we'll be discussing in this. Along with that, we'll be having a database consistency issue. This is specific, I could say, to mostly the customers who are on a VM where they are having a Microsoft SQL Server as a model repository database, and that is where might be some need to know consistency configurations, which they should be aware of if they follow the documentation though. Yeah. So let's have a understanding of what is this. So MRS database configuration. So this is the most common error, or um, you know all different new customers actually end up hitting this issue, where they are yet to learning or they're exploring on how to um, actually go ahead and create the MRS and configuring it. So typical scenarios are, where you have to given a JDBC URL. The important part of the JDBC URL is it's a data direct JDBC URL. So you will see the JDBC Informatica in the name there in the URL, and after that you would have to give the database host name. There is a format, there is a sample format already available in the admin console when you are where you are writing it, but eventually you have to provide the host name and the port number and the service name of the database service. Okay, so in case of Oracle, right? So what is important is you should be knowing the URL you are providing is a valid host, and the account credentials you provided, the user credentials should be working. And whenever you change the password, it is the user's responsibility to edit those properties in the admin console for MRS also, and restart the MRS in order to take care of that. So also one more point to be noted is you have to use the JDBC URL based on the DB server configuration. You need to check with your database admin for what kind of JDBC URL to be used, because for example you might have a scan IP based configuration, you might have um, cluster, or you might have a load balancer where all the requests to the service actually goes to the load balancer, and the load balancer delegates the task to its worker databases underneath, right? So what I would suggest is basically, if you start facing any such issues, the best partner for you would be use this JDBC test utility. I'm giving the refer KB there, right away there. You can see 192305 is a KB article which you can refer to run the JDBC test utility. So the test utility just takes the details which you are providing to the MRS here in the admin console, and it's going to test it and properly give you an error outside Informatica. Okay, and you can use it as a some test case for before you configure, and to ensure that your the JDBC URL is actually functioning as per your needs. So there is something called as connection timeouts as well. Okay, so we have seen where VM environment is used, and if the customers are actually having their whole Informatica on a different physical host than the physical host where the database is deployed, we have seen on a cloud or on a WAN network there is a delay in communication. Now this delay actually can create a multiple kind of communication issues, and also there are cases where you would reach with many hops and the connectivity is limited to certain switches over there. So like we have seen scenarios where intermittently also you might face a database connectivity error because one of the connection passes over a switch and the switch is not available a particular time. Okay, and we never know how to we can go about it, but all we can say is from our side is recommend you to ensure that you have a strong connectivity between the MRS service running node and the database. The preferably it should be, if you are in a VM, we find many customers resolve their connectivity issues with the database by just going with the um, deploying both the Informatica VM as well as the database VMs into the same physical host. So the database communication becomes a local host when it comes to the physical machine where the VMs is installed, right? So with that we have many the number of hops, actual hops, is actually not at all there, and it would be very fast to communicate because it becomes inter-process communication as such at the VM level side. Okay, let's go to the file system issues. The file system issues are these are pretty straightforward ones, like say you Informatica model repository service actually writes right into the log directory, into the work directory, and the search index directory. Now these three directories we need to make sure that we have the permissions configured, else most likely you will end up with a fatal error, not able to access the particular file system. And for work directory, there is another issue where it would try to uh, configure um, the Informatica's storage plugin, and it would not be able to do that. And cleaning up is something we have we have given the solution as a workaround to some customers, and you can refer the KB 514610 for that. Yeah, meanwhile I think the log directory is pretty clear and the search index directory is pretty clear, so I would just like to walk you through the work directory issue 514610 KB right now. Okay, yeah. Okay, so here's the KB I was referring to. So you would see this particular message in the service logs, both in the service logs directly from the domain log as well as the file system. So this is where you need to ensure that you have the file system permissions. Okay, and yeah, so you need to ensure that your particular MRS has the permissions on this particular work directory. Okay, so the work directory will be recreated once the MRS is restarted. So even what you can do is you can actually go ahead and delete the contents of the MRS, but we would not recommend it as a general practice, but in cases where you face some issues, it would be helpful, especially in a scenarios where you change the Unix user account from which the services have been running so far. So that is one typical scenario where we have seen users hitting this problem. Okay, let's get back to the presentation now. So then you have the space issue, and the another issue which is very pretty common is the space one, but we have also find some customers where they, because of some Linux bugs, they had faced a um, number generator issue. So this number generator issue is where when you are accessing the file system, it actually generates the seed, and that seed is generated using the OS provided system called APIs, and uh, it creates a temporary file for that, and basically deleting that file is what we have to do to get rid of this problem, and that is what is referred in KB 518991. It is a corner case, but I'm just adding it up here so that we can continue further. Okay, and then we have jars missing. So this is a common scenario where we have seen users end up deleting their jars or certain WAR files as well when they are migrating the file system, or there was a file system backup or restore activity done during which this was lost, or there are scenarios where it is a fresh installation and an upgrade, and the newly um, the extracted installer did not have the required files necessary for the services to come up, and that's where you end up certain class not found errors could be seen, and certain plugin registration errors also would be seen. The best way to deal with the problem is to reinstall those jars, but I would also recommend to involve Informatica support in those scenarios, because we would like to ensure that your binaries are consistent, especially when in the scenarios where you have some EBFs. Then comes the network issue. So the network issue is basically two categories, I would say. One is the port range full. So the port range is, the MRS does not have its dedicated port which it will always use. It is always going to pick up a port from the port range specified in the node's min and max port range. So the node will give one of the min and max port range, and MRS would pick that one randomly and then come up over that. Now there is, if your number of services is less than um, the range of the ports, then it is a good condition and we will definitely bring up the services. But on the other side, when your number of services is actually greater than the port range, it is highly possible that your services would end up starving for port numbers, because it would not take those ports from out of those range. And secondly, you have to ensure that you are not sharing the same port range with some other application, so that if the other application starts using those ports, our product will not be able to get those ports and eventually end up with some errors. And also verify, certain times you would also see that during an abnormal startup or abnormal termination, certain service processes would stay running as orphan processes. They become the child process of init instead of node, and when you start the services, those would still be taking those ports and not releasing them, and these could cause certain other issues. So you can actually get rid of all the orphan processes if at all you find them in your setup, and that is another reason where port range missing could be the scenario. Then comes the multicast enable NIC. We have seen this with 10.x version recently, 10.x. We have not seen so far these issues coming up with 10.2.1 or 10.1.1, but only with 10.0 we have seen issues where if you are in a VM and you are having a multicast enabled NIC, then the MRS startup would fail with a cache exception, no such device error. And you can refer to the KB article given 431547, which helps you to disable the multicasting on that particular NIC. And with that, you would be able to resolve this problem and bring up the MRS. Then comes the database side configuration level. So so database side configuration, we would you would actually be pretty much what is given in the documentation. Especially this slide is specifically meant, if I would say, it be for the first point there is especially for the SQL Server based users, because if you are using a SQL Server, the way the database handles the concurrency is different than other databases. So the SQL Server has a different way of handling the concurrency, and due to which you would see, if you go by default settings of the SQL Server, you might end up having deadlock issues in the queries which MRS fires. Therefore, to avoid that, it is required for us to ensure that the read committed snapshot and the snapshot isolation are set to true in the as per given in the installation guide, as well as you can refer to the KB article 323.022 for that. And the DB user account, whichever you use and for whichever database, it should have the necessary privileges which are specific to those databases, and it is actually given clearly in the documentation and has to be followed. We still see many times after a lot of back and forth debugging, we figure out that later that certain permissions were not given as expected. So it's if something is not configured as given in the documentation, it is the first thing which we would have to first rectify, and then we can further debug on that, right? Yeah. So the most important tip I would say is that importantly, you should know how to read the log. Referring the logs is the most important thing, because logs only give you the right evidence of what is happening. Okay, a solution might work or might not work, can be estimated, can be quantitatively measured by looking at the log which you are facing. Now, like say if you are facing an error and there is a KB article, then I would say yes, I would need to see the log having that message. That's where, so you need to know which log are you supposed to refer. So you might see a lot of articles written in the KB where they would have and mentioning about certain part of message, right? So but you need to understand where the log is coming from. So are you supposed to look for in JSF log, or you are supposed to look it in the service log or in the domain log? So that is something which has to be understood before confirming um, an issue, which issue to be a match for the KB article you see. Okay, so also ensure the process is up or it has gone down. I just showed in the beginning of this video that how you can verify that your process is up and running. So all you need to do is verify if the PID is existing for that. If the PID is existing, it means the process is, there are three scenarios possible. One scenario is the service comes up, stays for a bit of time and goes down by itself, um, and uh, and there is a consistently happening scenario. Second one is the process is tried to brought up but it is never coming up, so that is the second problem. The third problem would be the MRS came up but it is hang. Okay, so when it is hang, I would not expect uh, enough logging from the process if it is an hang scenario, but still if you enable debug logging, you might be able to get some more details about the issue. And whereas your first and second issue, where there is a gracefully going down scenario is considered, it should be logging something in the MRS service logs before it goes down, unless there is a file system disk space issue. Okay, and the third part is the process did not even come, right? So that is where it is like the Java itself triggering did not happen, or the Java arguments which are being passed to the MRS process to come up are not valid, and you can find exact information of that from the domain log. Always remember to take regular backups of the MRS database, as it is very useful in long runs, and it helps to quickly roll back to a situation where you have a consistent information available, even in case of um, even in case of disasters which might happen with respect to the MRS corruption and all. So we can also tell you is the XMX value of the JVM process is the key thing for identifying how much um, how much is your throughput of your this particular Java process. Like say you can actually tune your XMX values based on your needs. So it is not necessary the product provided XMX values will work for you. It depends on how many users you are running and how many kind of operations and how big are each of your objects. Okay, so all this come into calculation when you are doing it. So my recommendation would be you enable GC logging and find out the usage, and get the peak usage, and according to that you set your XMX value. There will be another video on this in this series of videos. You would also find a video for GC tuning. You can refer that for how to set your XMX value. Then there comes the beware while changing the advanced JVM option for special invisible characters. I have seen multiple times even in web access with the customers, where we provide them an JVM option to resolve certain issue or maybe some custom property which has to be added a JVM option. The DIS does not come up, the MRS does not come up, because the Java process was not triggered properly, because there was a new line character. The entire command is marked as complete on the place where you get a new line, and the next part will go as a separate command to the shell, and that's where the problem comes. So be aware that even though in the admin console when you're editing you would not be able to see the characters, it is always safe to open it in Notepad+ with all symbol views functionality and copy them and then paste them back, so that you don't add any extra new line characters or something, an invisible character which the shell might not recognize and mark it as a end of line. Okay, so here are the reference articles which we have come across in this presentation, and yeah, we would love to hear from you. You can actually send an email to support@videos@informatica.com, or you can also tweet for us on infasupport on twitter.com. So thank you for referring to this video, and I hope it would help you to troubleshoot your issues in MRS startups. Thank you.